Fasting is not a fix-all for everything. There are very clear times when you absolutely, positively should not fast. And it takes a lot of responsibility to be able to acknowledge when those times are. But I look at science and I look at data. So the first one is one that might go without saying. However, it needs an explanation. That's when you're simply run down. Now, there are a lot of people out there that tout fasting as a fix-all. Like, oh, my energy's low, fasting's gonna improve it. Look, from a lifestyle perspective, if you are chronically low energy, chronically metabolically unhealthy, then yes, fasting is probably going to give you more energy. It happens to a lot of people. But if you are a regular faster and you start to feel run down and low energy, fasting is simply not going to solve your problems. On one hand, it's simple energy balance, like you're probably just depleted and you probably need some dang food, and it's that simple. But on the other hand, it's more complex too. It comes down to micronutrients. Okay, if you are low on energy and you are a somewhat regular or even moderate faster, like maybe you do 16-8 a couple times per week or something, that you feel run down, that is your sign to take a break from fasting. A lot of it has to do with B vitamins. Let me explain from a recent study that was published in Nutrients. This study took a look at B vitamins, vitamin C, looked at magnesium, iron, and zinc, and how this plays a role in direct energy building, like energy manufacturing in the body. Basically, what it demonstrated is that nutrients are oxidized into acetyl coenzyme A, okay? And then acetyl coenzyme A further breaks down through glycolysis essentially from glucose into pyruvate. Okay, so what happens there is pyruvate is kind of a core piece of building energy. Now, if you remember sophomore biology class, you remember this whole Krebs cycle thing, right? Well, in order to get to pyruvate, the core for energy that we need vitamin B1, B2, B3, and B5 specifically, and vitamin C. But these B vitamins are critical, and if you don't have them at the very core level, you cannot create energy from glucose. You just simply cannot. Now, additionally, we have the citric acid cycle, right? So when, again, we get acetyl coenzyme A from the food that we eat, and it enters into the citric acid cycle to ultimately create what's called NADH, well, if you do not have nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide H with the hydrogen, you cannot have energy either. And B vitamins, as well as magnesium, as well as vitamin C, are required for this to happen. So it comes back down to this very simple thing, not to mention simple oxygen delivery within the body. Without these B vitamins, without the nutrients, we cannot literally produce energy. So when you are run down, and it's not a bigger metabolic issue, you need fuel, plain and simple. Take a break and come back to it. This next one sounds like one that is obvious, but once again, almost all of us make this mistake. That is when your training demand increases. Now, we view fasting as a hormetic stressor. I know I do. I view it as a stressor that I grow from and build resilience from. But when I am also training hard, I have a tendency to sometimes think, oh, cool, I'm gonna stack hormetic stressors on top of each other. From a stress resilience building perspective, this is great. Like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But you also need the downtime and the recovery. And there was an interesting paper that was pretty robust. It did a systematic review and a meta-analysis of 105 papers looking at over 5,400 people. It was published in Nutrition Reviews, and it was looking at the relationship between protein intake and lean body mass. And they found for every 0.1 gram per kilogram of body weight protein increase, there was more lean body mass built or recovered. And they ranged all the way from 0.5 grams of protein all the way up to 3.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And without fail, in a dose-dependent fashion, the more protein that was consumed, the more lean body mass was built and or more recovery. You might be thinking, what does this have to do with fasting? It's plain and simple. We have to remember, even Dr. Don Layman, who's like the godfather of protein research, really suggests that we cannot really get more than like 40-ish grams of protein in a serving. However, you can increase up to like 65 grams and you're still gonna get some benefit and squeak out a little bit more. But over that, you're just not gonna get a whole lot. Like, it's what's happening to it, we don't entirely know. The bottom line is that do the math. If you're fasting and you only have a few opportunities to get up to 65 grams of protein and you're really training a lot, you require days that you're not fasting to simply get the protein volume up. I don't look at protein over the course of one day. I try to look at it over the course of a few days. So if you fast, that's fine, but you need to make a concerted effort to take days off of fasting simply to get enough protein in over the aggregate of a few days. It is simply not worth the effort into your workout if you're not going to repair. Plain and simple. That is not the time to fast as you increase your training demand. The other thing you have to look at with your training demand is you're going to have a lot of oxidative stress that occurs. And fasting is also an oxidative stressor on top of the training. So one of the things that I do if my training demand is increasing, I do increase the amount of antioxidants I take during my fast. That includes taking in things like green tea. Like I consume a lot of green tea when I'm fasting, but there's a lot of different ways that I implement tea into fasts. For the record, Pique Tea is a sponsor on this channel, and I did put a link down below for a discount on Dr. Jason Fung's fasting teas from Pique. So he helped formulate these. You probably know Dr. Jason Fung. Very interesting fasting teas. There's a fasting tea bundle that you can save 12% plus get a free gift on. 4 different kinds of tea. There's the bergamot tea, there's the matcha green tea, there's the ginger digestion tea, and there's the herbal cinnamon tea that's caffeine free. So all of these are 4 different kinds of fasting teas. Really cool technology with these that make them superior for fasting specifically. However, you don't have to be fasting to consume them. They're cold extracted, so that retains the polyphenols, retains the antioxidants. They're triple toxin screened. So you're not getting into heavy metals, you're not getting the other garbage that a lot of times end up in tea. They're USDA organic, and they're super high in polyphenols, which makes them especially effective if your goal is benefits of fasting. So I like to consider them sort of a fasting enhancer. That's my terminology, not theirs. I do think they improve the effectiveness of a fast. So especially if you're stressing your body, but it helps you get through the fast a little bit easier in my opinion. So that link down below is for Pique Tea fasting tea bundle. So that is a 12% discount plus a free gift. Top line of the description underneath this video. This next one is the worst, like the literal worst time. And I know it's not the first on this list, but it is the worst one. There's newer literature to back this up. And that is when you are almost sick or when you feel like you're starting to get sick. There's some obscure literature and anecdotal evidence that suggests that when you're sick, sometimes fasting actually is beneficial. But if you are, let's say, like give you my situation, I come home, the kids are sick, I know I'm next, how do I prevent this from happening? That would be a time when I would say, I'm not fasting. And now there's literature to support that. First, we look at a study published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. Now, you may have heard this paper before. So what they did is they took a look at these Taekwondo athletes for 30 days while they were dropping weight. So they were reducing calories quite a bit. And they were measuring their salivary immunoglobulin A, their salivary IgA, before the 30 days, during the 30 days, and after the 30 days, a collective total of 7 weeks. Really wild what they found here. They found that as they were reducing calories, their salivary IgA dropped tremendously at the same rate that their increase of upper respiratory tract infections increased. So we have a serious issue. We have immune system suppression with caloric restriction that's extreme and increase in respiratory infections, a big problem. Not fasting specific, but what you need to be aware of is if you are fasting, keep your calories high enough. And probably don't fast if you're around people that are sick and you know you're gonna get sick. But there was a really cool new rodent model study that was published in the journal Immunity. This took a look at mice, and it had mice either eat breakfast or skip breakfast, like not eat through breakfast, and they measured their monocyte levels. Now at baseline, both sets of mice, fasting or not fasting, had the same levels of white blood cells, monocytes. But 4 hours after baseline, the mice that did not eat breakfast, that were fasting, had 90% less circulating white blood cells, monocytes. They found that they went back to the bone marrow to hibernate. That's where white blood cells come from. So they went back to the bone marrow to hibernate. And in some ways, these white blood cells get stronger. But what happens is once the mice would refeed, these white blood cells would pour back into the bloodstream and trigger a massive surge of inflammation that increased their likelihood of getting sick. So what happens here is if you fast when you're not exposed to illness, it could potentially make your white blood cells stronger. It could increase the survivability of them. But because you are exposed to a pathogen, it's the wrong time to do it. And this literature suggests this. Even though it's rodent model, it makes a lot of sense that fasting when your body's trying to fight something to prevent you from coming down with it, that's the time when you should probably fuel a little bit, not fast. The next one is a little bit more specific. That's if you're trying to conceive. And I'll keep this one short because I know it's not everyone that's watching this video. Now, I don't want you to skip through it because I've got some good stuff here that you should understand that's applicable to men too. Okay, fasting decreases luteinizing hormone pulsatility. And what that means is that the luteinizing hormone that stimulates ovulation, stimulates the menstrual cycle in women, and stimulates testosterone production in men decreases when you're calorically restricted. The American Journal of Physiology published a paper specifically with women that found the more the caloric restriction, the more the deficit, the more the menstrual disturbances or disruption, and consequently the less ability to conceive. But what we did find in a study that was published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism is that in women specifically, as long as they were consuming at least 30 calories per day of lean body mass, they would be fine. Now, you don't need to go do specific math. My point is that anything below that, it decreased their luteinizing hormone pulsatility. Above that, they were fine. So if you're going to fast and you're trying to conceive, you do need to fast to improve your insulin resistance or whatever, but then you need to make sure you're eating more on the back end. And for men, this goes for you too as far as testosterone is concerned. The next one seems obvious. If you are going through a phase where you're having trouble sleeping, take a break from fasting. I had to take my own advice on this. There was a study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. When they put subjects on a very low calorie diet, like 800 calories, plain and simple, increased their sleep latency, decreased their slow wave sleep patterns, and ended up just disrupting all kinds of things and changed their nocturnal temperature, which is indicative of poor sleep anyway, and that happens with lower calories. Okay, well, we know that exists. Is there more data? Well, if more data, we look at a study published in Aging that took a look at mice. I know mice, but whatever. And it found that when calories were restricted aggressively, it would have an impact on reductions in leptin, reductions in insulin, and ultimately drive up hunger nocturnally. Now, when this happens subconsciously, it makes you wake up. Your drive is to eat and survive, and that's going to take priority over sleep to a certain point. Now, this is mice, but what we can say is that the adrenaline spike that you get from fasting is probably not good for poor sleep. And maybe taking a few weeks off isn't going to hurt you just to restore sleep patterns before you start fasting again. So as always, keep it locked to here on my channel. See you tomorrow.